The defense has finally begun presenting their case to the jury in the first criminal trial of Donald Trump, and it may not be going exactly as they hoped. The day ended with probably the most dramatic moment in the trial so far, as Robert Costello, a lawyer who once advised Michael Cohen and one of the few witnesses the defense plans to call, was admonished by Judge Juan Marchand for his reactions to objections. The defense has also signaled that they could rest their case as soon as tomorrow, meaning the big question of whether Donald Trump will take the stand in his own defense appears to be unlikely, despite the fact that Trump has repeatedly said that he would testify. So how will he square that? I expect him and his dress matchy-matchy like the boss, red tie wearing emotional support entourage will think of some type of excuse any moment now. Back with me, Lisa Rubin, Duncan Levin, and Lachlan Cartwright. Let's talk about the atmospherics, Lisa. Here's who was in court with Donald Trump today. We'll just put it up, Little Roads Gallery, Alan Wilson, some people you haven't heard of, some Congressman Andrew Clyde, insurrectionist Congressman Andrew Clyde. Alan Dershowitz, interesting, he was there. A Missouri Attorney General candidate was there. Bernie Kerik, who Donald Trump pardoned felon Bernie Kerik. Kash Patel, former chief of staff to the Secretary of Defense, who would probably be in the next administration. Vernon Jones, the sort of Democrat turned really right-wing, wacky Georgia Republican. And actor Chuck Zito, former president of the New York chapter of the Hells Angels. What was that about?
I have no idea what Chuck Zito was about. But, let's talk about the larger atmospherics. There was a moment last week, Joy, on Thursday, where the DA's office was complaining about the disruption caused by members of Trump's entourage basically coming in and out of the courtroom because they were having press availabilities outside during breaks and therefore would miss the beginning of the renewed session. And when they did that, Todd Blanche said, hey, look, I can't control these people. They're just members of the public. I think anybody who has watched the surrogates operation over the last several days understands that this is not just some coincidental gathering of members of the public, but a very tightly coordinated surrogates operation in coordination with the Trump campaign itself. They are selecting who comes to court every day. They have a sense down to the seat of how many people they can fit in their first two rows of the gallery that are assigned to them, and they fit each and every one of them. And they are accomplishing certain objectives each and every time that they call upon people to come here. Sometimes they're asking for people, for example, who are state attorneys general or candidates for attorney general. But that guy who came today, Will Scharf, for example, that you mentioned, he's not just a candidate for Missouri attorney general. He's one of Trump's appellate lawyers. So there are lots of people there wearing multiple hats, but they're all hats that fit into the MAGA world. This is not some disparate assembly of people who just happen to like Donald Trump. So I'm glad that you called attention to that.
And if I could just take you into the courtroom today,
Please.
sorry, Joy. As I'm sitting there, and this is becoming a daily occurrence, we can hear Trump in the hallway, and so we all turn to then see him walk in. And then today, people just kept coming and coming, and it was like, oh, there's Alan Dershowitz. There is Chuck Zito, who was the Hells Angels, led the New York chapter of the Hells Angels, and they just kept coming and coming to the point there wasn't enough room for them to sit. And then it's left up to Boris Epshteyn, one of Trump's legal advisors, to play sort of party planner, party seater, as he then finds more room for them up the end of the courtroom. And to the extent that today they even didn't have enough room to accommodate all of them. So it's become just this circus every day. And you can see that Mershon is growing tired of it, although he hasn't made any kind of order about it. But it is becoming a running spectacle day in, day out. It's almost like, which member of the wannabe Veep squad are we going to get today? And today we were overblown with wannabes.
They also often dress alike. They dress like Donald Trump. Kash Patel, let's play Kash Patel today. He wasn't dressed alike today, weirdly enough. Go ahead. Here's Kash.
Michael Cohen admitted on the witness stand just this morning to 6 different felonies of stealing Donald Trump's money. After 6 weeks of trial, we finally have a crime. We also have a victim. That victim is Donald J. Trump.
They look like a singing group, or maybe like cosplayers who are trying to pretend to be Donald Trump, like Trump impersonators.
Did Kash not get the memo about the red tie? Did he leave his red tie at home today?
Yeah, he's done. I think he's done. Whatever his future was in the Trump administration, done. Not wearing the uniform. Let's play Alina Habba because she didn't wear a red tie, but here's what she said.
Well, he's got to listen to his attorneys. It's not as much what he wants to do. We know he wants to testify. He is willing. It's pretty quick, and it would be a pretty short testimony as far as the questions that would need to be asked, because he had no part in this.
Duncan Levin, it's clear that Donald Trump is not going to testify because, first of all, he would commit perjury on the stand. He's not capable of telling the truth. That's number one. Number two, he would destroy himself because he would get up there and incoherently ramble that he did not sleep with Stormy Daniels and that Michael Cohen is a terrible person and a rat. And he wouldn't be able to stop that because his brain don't work good. So he won't testify. How will he be able to get out and spin that he was told that he can't testify, that his lawyer said he couldn't testify? Because that's not true, right? He has the right to testify.
He said stuff all throughout this trial that does not comport with any reality, starting with the fact that he said that this is all trying to keep him off of the campaign trail when he has taken every single turn at this trial to make it longer than it needs to be. He's forced the DA's office to call custodial witnesses, the head of C-SPAN, people from the book publisher. He could have gotten a lot of these exhibits in a lot faster. The fact that this trial has lasted as long as it has is in large measure his fault. He said a lot of things that don't comport with any reality. And frankly, because of the gag order, he's earlier said he wasn't able to testify. And the judge made clear you have every right to testify. He's going to say whatever he's going to say out on the campaign trail. And you can be sure that the minute this trial's over, whatever it is, when he's released from this gag order, he is going to start unleashing different types of narratives about it. But he does not really need to testify because what the defense is setting up is this defense that this was something that was cooked up between Alan Weisselberg and Michael Cohen and that it didn't involve him at all. And he doesn't really need to get on the stand to say that he didn't know anything because he's going to get eviscerated on cross-examination. The downside to him taking the stand far outweighs the fact that he could say, no, this was about Melania. I wanted to make sure it wasn't about the election. I wanted to make sure she didn't find out about it. It's all belied by the evidence. And I think that all of the other evidence really is going to kill that. And so there's really no reason for it.
And note that Melania is not there, nor any other members of the family. Only the less beloved son showed up just one time. The court, let me just read to you guys now the moment when the court was cleared today. We now do have that transcript. Let me read that to you. And here it is. This is the court. The fact that this is the judge speaking. The fact that I had to clear this courtroom and that the court officers, including the captain, had great difficulty clearing the courtroom and that there was an argument back and forth between the press and including counsel for the press goes to why I had to clear the courtroom in the first place. And that is, sir, your conduct is contemptuous right now. I'm putting you on notice that your conduct is contemptuous. If you try to stare me down one more time, I will remove you from the stand. I will strike his entire testimony. Do you understand me? Mr. Bovee, yes, Judge, I understand. This is the judge, Judge Marchand again. Listen to the question and answer the question. The witness, this is the witness. Can I say something, please? The judge, no, this is not a conversation, to which the witness said, okay. Lisa, that was a dramatic moment.
It was, and it wasn't one that we saw, Joy, so I'm really glad that you read the transcript. That transcript happened in a sealed courtroom, as you just noted. That was something that Judge Marchand said only with Robert Costello on the stand and the lawyers in the room and then the additional people that are there for the DA and for the Trump folks. But no members of the public, and certainly not the press, was there to see that. That having been said, Costello continued to sort of talk over objections and really resist the questions posed to him from the DA's office. He has not been a good witness, even when he was better counseled by Judge Marchand. So let's see how that ends tomorrow.